view and actually show you the bladder first. So in this view, you can see the bladder is going to be, basically if you follow the large intestine down, that'll dead end kind of near the bladder. Okay, so you'll find the bladder right at the end of the large intestine, and you'll see it in two different views. So kind of note that your bladder and your cat may not look like this. Sometimes you see it as a hard structure like this, kind of looks like a stone. Or sometimes you see it looks like a empty balloon. So it's like a balloon that's not blown up yet. Sometimes it looks like that. It just really depends on whether the bladder was full or empty when the cat was euthanized. That's really the biggest difference. I'll show you the bladder if you're not really sure what a balloon-like one looks like in my cat, because one of my cats is a little bit blown up, but this is also what like another bladder would look like. Okay? If you're not really sure where the bladder is also, a good way to find it is once you find the kidney, you can just follow the ureter down. Note that the ureter too, it's going to kind of look like it's covered in fat. Okay, that's okay. There's usually a lot of like fat tissue on the bottom of the cat around the kidneys, so it's like for protection, obviously, since the kidneys are so exposed from the back. All right, any questions for the reproductive system before we move into digestive or reproductive? Okay, so page 15. And there isn't too much you need to know for the female reproductive system, and I'm actually going to knock two more things off of your list. So with the ligaments, they're present and I can point them out to you, but the round ligament and the ovarian ligament are easily construed for other structures in the cat dissection. So in order to not make it as like confusing as possible, we're going to knock two off. So round ligament, ovarian ligament, you don't need to know those in the cat dissection because the round ligament is going to look like the broad ligament and the ovarian ligament is going to look like the ovary. They're just very, very small parts. So just to kind of point them out, the round ligament is right here. It's actually embedded in the broad ligament, which I'll point out more in a second. And then the ovarian ligament is just right here. So it's just really tiny. Both of these are so small that we can't realistically even put a pin in them because they're so small. So I'm going to knock them off for that reason, but they are present in the system. And remember that I added suspensory ligament. So taking away two, but adding one. All right, so to start, even though it's not on your list, I'm going to point out the uterus because that's the easiest structure to find in the female reproductive system in the cats, and it'll lead you directly to all of the things you do need to identify. So right here, this is the uterine horn. So cats have a uterine horn on either side of their body, and it's actually going to be superior, or I guess in this position, how we're dissecting down, they'll be sitting superficial to the kidneys. So here you can kind of see just a corner of the kidney right here. So if you have a female cat, I recommend doing the reproductive system first so that you can identify all the parts and not accidentally rip through it trying to get through the kidney. So here you have the uterine, so if that's the uterus, excuse me, so if that's the uterus, then if you pull this up, there's going to be a thin sheet attached to it on either side. That's going to be the broad ligament. It's going to look like a mesentery. So if you look at the intestine right here, just to remind you what the mesentery looks like, it's kind of that sheet-like structure that holds onto the organ. It's going to look a lot like that. Okay? You're not going to have the vessels. Sometimes you do have fat in it, but it's just going to look essentially like a mesentery attached to the uterus. Now if you follow the uterus up, you're going to get to something that kind of looks like a bean shape. So it's going to be like relatively smooth, and then you're going to get to this really bumpy spot before it goes smooth again. That bumpy spot is where we're going to find the ovary and the fallopian tube. So that bumpy spot, you'll see they've pulled it apart, but what you'll see is that the fallopian tube sits right on top of the ovary. So literally it sits like on top of it. So you're going to have this little tiny bean shape here. Half of the bean is going to have a tissue that's a little bit thicker, so there's going to be something sitting on top of it, and it's usually lateral. Okay, so usually you'll find that the fallopian tube is going to be in the lateral portion of the ovary, and then the medial portion of the ovary is going to be exposed ovary. And like I said, here you can see that they've actually pulled it back with this pin. We're not going to be doing that. We're just going to leave it right on there because it's kind of hard to do that part of the dissection because it's just so tiny. And then if you follow this up, so if you go past the bean, you'll see that there's another structure on the other side that kind of looks like a thinner version of the uterine. It'll feel just like the uterus horn did, but just a little bit thinner. That's going to be the suspensory ligament. So here we have that suspensory ligament. So just to kind of rehash what you need to know, we have the suspensory ligament up here. the ovary, which is the bean, the fallopian tube, which is the structure sitting over the bean, and the broad ligament, which is essentially the uterus mesentery. If you want to think about it in those terms. All right. Any questions about the female reproductive system? All right. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward in cats. So now